I'm Matt McClure.
And I'm Francesca Maxime, and this is Currents.
Infidelity, what makes people cheat?
As the old saying goes, desperate people do desperate things. And many people turn to outside relationships out of desperation.
Some faith-filled advice on staying faithful.
On what do you base your relationship? What is the value system you're operating from?
And Lino Rulli goes back to his roots.
That's my great-grandfather with a big mustache.
Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. We hear a lot about it, cheating. The word can mean many things. There's what happens in the classroom around the country, sharing your homework, quote unquote, or, peeking over someone's shoulder at test time.
Yeah, even when you didn't really mean to. Well, baseball players have also been accused of illegally medicating to perform better on the field. I did not do so on Tuesday night. But then there's also another type of cheating that has been in the news, marital infidelity, and that's what we want to focus on.
Yeah, and in fact, one study shows that 22% of adults in a monogamous relationship have cheated.
It is happening everywhere, and with a couple of high-profile situations playing out in the public stage in just the last few months, I decided to head out and see what the public had to say. From politics to professional sports, cheating runs rampant. South Carolina Governor Mark Sanford spilling details of his extramarital affair from the podium. Devout Catholic actor Mel Gibson leaving his marriage of decades for a new lover and child. Former NFL quarterback Steve McNair, whose affair with a younger woman turned deadly.
Well, we're seeing publicized cases. I don't think the cases that we've seen in the media are that different from what happens to people who aren't celebrities.
With today's pressures to be all things to all people all the time, psychologist Jeffrey Kleinberg says what often leads to an affair is a perfect storm of stressors, including troubles with personal finances, children, or even other family members.
As the old saying goes, desperate people do desperate things. And many people turn to outside relationships out of desperation. They know it's dangerous. They know it could put everything that they hold dearly at risk.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
This young woman has never been married, but has been cheated on twice. It's something she wouldn't wish on anyone.
You know, you're really upset, but I've been cheated on twice, so it's just, we're done. That's it. You don't have to explain anything to me. I don't want to know anything. We're done.
And this UPS driver says that he was cheated on, but he also cheated too.
By your friend.
And how did it feel? How was it? How did you take it?
Very, very hard, very hard. It's not a nice feeling.
On the other hand, this couple has been in a monogamous marriage for 50 years. That's right, 50, 5 decades. And they say the key to a long-lasting union is respect.
I think it's generally approved, it's generally advertised, it's generally known in all the newspapers and everywhere else that this is what a lot of people do. So people think that it's acceptable.
But a physical affair is just one kind. Dr. Kleinberg says just emotional intimacy outside of the marriage, which now often begins through exchanges on the internet, can wreak havoc as well.
It's much more difficult to repair physical affairs after that than it is just emotional intimacy. But emotional intimacy with someone outside the marriage might be a risk indicator that needs to be attended to.
The good news is there is hope, recognizing the signs of trouble before they start and counseling when something goes wrong.
If a couple is willing to do the work and willing to not make any decisions out of anger, but to see a trained professional who's not going to judge them, but will help them understand what might have contributed to the problems, I'm very hopeful for those individuals.
And you know, when I was interviewing people for that piece, the couple that was together for 5 decades, they really have a different way of looking at marriage than I think a lot of people do today. And the standards that were applicable now, or that were applicable then, you would think or hope are still applicable now, but who knows?
Right, right. And you know, she kind of said that herself in the interview too. You know, it's kind of weird though that, you know, like my parents have been together for, gosh, going on like 40 years now. My grandparents were married for a long time in monogamous relationships. So that's kind of what I've known and seen all my life. So it also depends on not only what you're seeing in, you know, media and just in culture itself, but what you see in your family as well that has a bearing on your relationships too.
I absolutely agree. Interesting. Not necessarily something I ever thought was up for interpretation.
Right.
But anyway, we'll have more on that a little bit later on.
Right, and I'll talk with a priest about different forms of cheating. He'll also have some advice to avoid going astray.
But stay tuned. Coming up next, we have some surprising and some not so surprising opinions on health care.
That and the rest of the day's headlines when Currents returns.
Welcome back to Currents. I'm Francesca Maxime.
And I'm Matt McClure. Coming up in just a bit, we'll continue our discussion on cheating, including some advice on repairing broken relationships.
But first, let's take a look at the day's headlines. It is another setback for the president's proposed health care reform. After decades of advocating in favor of universal health coverage, some Roman Catholic bishops are changing course. For 30 years, and until last month, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops had lobbied for universal care in part for social justice to help out the poor. But some, like Cardinal Justin Regali, haven't liked what they've seen as inadequate efforts to curb new abortion funding within universal care proposals. An Iowa bishop has even gone so far as saying that no health care is better than the wrong health care. Meanwhile, a coalition of conservative Christian groups said this week that the country's current healthcare system is working despite all its problems. The newly formed Freedom Federation is made up of some of the largest conservative Christian groups in the U.S. The federation says it would only be happy with healthcare reform if taxpayer funds were not used for abortion. The group is also opposed to the rationing of healthcare for the elderly. An estimated 45 million Americans lack health care coverage, but a Federation spokesman says he still supports the current system, calling it the best in the world. Perhaps health care reform's biggest advocate, Senator Ted Kennedy, will be remembered during a private prayer service and celebration of life memorial this evening in Boston. Kennedy chaired the Senate Health, Education, and Labor Relations Pensions Committee. Some of Kennedy's colleagues, like Senator Robert Byrd of West Virginia, are pushing for a new health care reform bill to be finalized and then named after the late senator.
Scranton, Pennsylvania Bishop Joseph Martino will step down next week, according to several reports. Martino's resignation would come early. He's just 62 years old. That is 13 years younger than the mandatory retirement age for bishops. Martino gained notoriety for his vocal opposition to abortion. He famously stated last year that any Catholic politician who supports what he called the culture of death should not receive communion. A first for the U.S., and it's happening right here in Brooklyn. St. Joseph's Parish in Prospect Heights will be the site of the nation's first Missio ad Gentes, a mission of the Neo-Catechumenal Way. The goal of the mission is to evangelize and strengthen the Catholic Church in communities. St. Joseph's is currently undergoing renovations to make room for the mission. You can read more about it in this week's tablet, which you can pick up at any parish in the Brooklyn Diocese. You can also head over to thetablet.org. And as local students are preparing themselves for the start of the new school year, Catholic schools elsewhere are feeling pressure. A new policy in place in India would allow local elected officials to serve on school committees. A spokesman for India's bishops says that will lead to unnecessary political interference. The policy is part of a larger education bill that the bishops there support.
Well, stay tuned. There's much more current straight ahead. Coming up, when couples who say I do don't.
Not spending enough time, a lack of communication, a preference for someone or something.
Welcome back. Well, we continue our discussion on infidelity following some high-profile cases that have really been in the news in recent months.
That's right. And earlier you heard from an expert and some men and women on the street who've experienced firsthand the good and bad in relationships.
Now we're going to go hear from somebody who has some firsthand experience helping couples preparing to get married.
His name is Monsignor Guy Massey. He's pastor of St. Andrew the Apostle Church in Bay Ridge. He's very involved in pre-Cana marriage preparation in the Brooklyn Diocese, and I recently had a chance to speak with him. What constitutes cheating? Because it may not be as simple as a one-sentence definition, I would imagine.
Depends on what we're talking about. If we're talking about cheating in a marriage, I think it's a violation of the marital covenant between two people. And that's a serious issue. And there are many levels of this issue. There is a not spending enough time, a lack of communication, a preference for someone or something or some other activity to the family or to the wife and or husband. Or it could be even more serious, and that could be having sexual relations with someone who is not your spouse.
Well, what about these other forms? I mean, we were talking a little bit before we actually started the interview about, spending time, maybe a husband spending time with, let's say, his poker buddies or something like that, might be constituted as cheating.
In some way, if those poker buddies begin to dominate, or the gambling begins to dominate over and above the marital relationship, and I'm not making enough time for my wife, or I'm not even thinking about, then the person to whom we are committed, the cause to which we are committed, takes precedent over everything else that we are doing. And so we reconcile all of our other interests in light of that commitment. How does my wife come first in this? How do my children come? How does my vocation fit into this behavior? And if it doesn't, then we need to sit down and talk, or you need to sit down to reevaluate your behavior. I think that's an important issue in that, how to look at that.
Gotcha. Now, we were, as I mentioned as we started, there are several public figures that we have seen that have, I guess, in a lot of cases, fallen from grace because of infidelity in a marriage. What do we learn from those situations? Do people learn anything by, I guess, the example, be it good or bad, of our public leaders?
Well, I think our public leaders are just that. They are public leaders, they're political leaders, they're people we, I suppose, invest with trust. Our public leaders are not always our moral leaders. We would like them to be moral, but the governor or the president is not the religious leader of the country or the state. We would like them to be moral for numerous reasons. I would imagine in some societies, and some people would feel, well, if you are not faithful in a commitment to your home and your family, and if you have done this there, which is so sacrosanct, well, are you trustworthy in the public arena and in the handling of matters of state for us? That's certainly a very valid way, I think, to look at this.
Right.
There are other people who would say, no, that what we do privately has nothing to do with our public trust. This depends, I think, on individuals. I tend to think it really does actually have an effect on how we deal publicly, is also affected by how we're living privately.
Right. Talk a little about the effect that this has on a family unit.
Well, in these days of economic problems, this infidelity has affected many situations, not only public figures. I think, one, adultery really is a crime against the family. It's a crime against the other spouse. It is. It has ramifications. It's a breaking of trust. It's a breaking of trust between a husband and wife, between a child and parents. It shakes the foundation of the family, particularly for children, and this causes all sorts of problems. How do you get that trust back? What example, if it's a man who does this, what example does he set for his sons? How will his sons treat their future wives or their wives? As a result, I think it sets not a good precedent. Now, if there are problems in a marriage, like what causes the infidelity? Well, sometimes there are problems in the marriage which we don't hear about in the newspaper. Sometimes there's a lack of communication in the marriage. Sometimes there's a drifting out of the marriage looking for things that the marriage should be giving, like communication, like doing things together, like being part of a unit.
Right.
I think in matters of sexuality, that's always going to be with us. There is always going to be attractions. There are always going to be temptations. There's always going to be, well, what if I, or things look better on across the street, etc. I think those are very real. Well, then how do you reel yourself in back to reality? On what do you base your relationship? What is the value system you're operating from? I think those questions have to be asked. Right. And sometimes when a marriage suffers this, can it survive? Yes. And I've seen it survive.
Right.
But it has to be worked on with both partners. There cannot be a third party involved in this.
Right.
There has to be an admission that what I have done is wrong in a society that doesn't seem to want to say that. Mm-hmm. We have a no-fault morality here. This is wrong. How do we make this better? Both have to be willing to commit to the relationship.
Right.
Both may need counseling as a family, and they have to rebuild the trust.
Right.
Very frequently, it's the trust that's shattered.
And it's a tough thing to do. Well, Monsignor, thank you so much for being here. It's time has flown by as I predicted it would. Monsignor, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Monsignor Guy Massey there of St. Andrew the Apostle Church in Bay Ridge. And, you know, he points out something that's, I think, very significant to be noted, is that our public leaders are just that, our public leaders, not necessarily our moral leaders. I think as we find out over and over again, you know, we'd like for them to be moral people, but they're not necessarily going to be perfect. They're not going to be perfect.
No, they're not perfect. No one really is. That's why we
Right.
have, you know, Jesus and God that we look to for our guidance. The thing is that when you have a certain amount of fame and celebrity, as is the case with many athletes, as is with the case with many elected officials, there is with that, it comes with a certain kind of moral code of which you sort of intuitively are supposed to aspire
Right.
to, if nothing else. And so whether or not you have an actual spiritual or religious title, I think that as a public figure, you do need to be cognizant of your actions and how they relate to the public.
Absolutely, because you're setting an example for the whole country, really, as it were.
For sure.
Well, stay tuned. We have much more currents coming up straight ahead. Coming up, Lino Rulli gets a taste of the old country.
Have a coffee. It's 90 degrees outside. Why don't you have something hot to drink?
Well, you know him best for his catches of the day right here on Currents. He's also Sirius Satellite Radio's Catholic guy. Our Lino Rulli certainly goes places.
Sure does, and as we've been showing you, he used to host a show in Minnesota called Generation Cross. But you may be wondering, where did Lino really come from?
That's right, and that's exactly what we're about to find out. In today's Lino Rulli Classic, he goes back to his roots as he and Father Peter Laird visit Italy and the town where the Rullis originate.
Now you have to picture this. We're in the middle of Italy, basically, in this region called the Abruzzo. And Villa Sant'Angelo, this is where my roots are from. This is where my ancestors are from. My grandparents, my great-grandparents, everybody comes from this one little town. It's basically like my own little Corleone family story.
I was worried about waking up the next morning to find a cow's head in my bed.
It's a horse's head. In the movie The Godfather, he wakes up with a horse's head, not a cow's head.
You got connections with the mafia?
I don't anymore. That's why I'm trying to get connections. We used to have connections to the mafia. That's how my family actually came to America. And I know it's a bad stereotype that all Italians are in the mafia, but...
It's one of the things that I think people think most of, besides spaghetti, the mafia.
That's right. It is a negative stereotype, but You know what? I'm Catholic. I'm used to negative stereotypes. All right, so I say my family's from Villa Sant'Angelo, but literally this house, number 44, this is where my grandpa was born. This is where his father was born.
Right here.
I can be made.
44.
All right, so we're outside for like 5 minutes, and the neighbor lady comes up, and she invites us into her house.
And so here we are, just waiting to enjoy this nice Italian cup of coffee. He's a star even in his hometown.
Nobody invites me into their kitchen in America. We come to my hometown. As soon as we show in, oh, you look familiar. Why don't you come in and have something to drink? Have a coffee. It's 90 degrees outside. Why don't you have something hot to drink?
Cognac, qualcosina
dentro. She wanted some cognac.
Io devo guidare.
Buongiorno.
And who knows who this lady is, but oh, hello, nice to see you.
Sono Padre Pietro.
Sedetevi, comodatevi.
Signora, ha fatto questo nella casa?
Sì, sì.
Ah, bravo!
Grazie.
Non mangia per niente, però.
Sì, signorina.
I just asked her if there happened to be young ladies here in town for Lino, and she said there are many, many.
She said there are many. How is that possible? There's 500 people in this town, and there's many young women.
Perché lui ha due cose più importanti per sposare, no? La prima, una donna italiana.
Sì.
La seconda, una donna cattolica.
He was just explaining, I have two requirements for me to get married. An Italian woman, and she's got to be Catholic.
Fatta bene la cucina.
Trying to talk over these people. And then they whip out the pictures.
Poi questo sarebbe la nonna della mamma.
Sì, this is my great-grandmother.
E questo è il nonno. Eccolo, vedi che baffone.
That's my great-grandfather with the big mustache.
Eccola la nonna tua.
Ah, sì, okay. This is my grandmother
Che
here.
bella. Lino, this is a good-looking family. What happened to you?
Come on, knock it off. And so we're on our way, we're leaving, we're saying thank you, you know. Molto grazie.
Ciao, ciao.
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 And as we're leaving, she goes, oh, you know, by the way, I have a key to the house. She has a key to my family's house. I don't have a key to my family's house, and I'm family.
Pasqualina, anche lei ce l'ha la chiave.
See, everybody's got a key. She also has a key to the place. This is interesting. I'll tell you if there's something here to see. Well, do you think it's a wine press? It's a wine press. So I guess this is where my ancestors got drunk. I don't know. This is where my ancestors made wine, and all I do is wine. So you see, there's a connection here.
I think also it's something important for us that we can trace our roots back as well. We can trace them all the way back to God.
And that's one of the big selling points of the church, is it not? That just like I can trace my roots all the way back, that you can trace the roots of the Christian faith all the way back to the apostles, which means all the way back to Jesus.
And I think that is a beautiful thing because it gives us a sense of security, the same kind of groundedness that you feel here in that door, even though you don't have a key, we ought to feel. But the beautiful thing is, we have a key.
In what sense?
Well,
you mean because you have a key to the place too? Great, even you have the key.
Please God, you'll find the key that brings you to heaven.
Villa Sant'Angelo and Lino Rulli, one of our fearless reporters in his hometown. And we also have another fearless reporter who is joining us now, our Natalia Ortiz. Welcome on this Friday to our little happy set here.
Yes.
And apparently, since I'm going on vacation tomorrow, you are going to be filling some rather large shoes that I have.
Well, I've got rather large shoes myself, but I've already asked the tech crew to give me a couple of reams of paper to stand on because that I will not be able to make.
The height, the sheer height.
Yeah. The secrets nobody knows about at home. There you go. There's one.
Yeah.
Right.
That's all right.
Just because I'm a giant. You know, that's the only.
No, you're not a giant. I'm just a little bit shorter than the average, person, I think.
Well, okay.
Platform shoes. We can make it all work out.
Right.
How cute was that piece, though, that Lino just did about being back in Italy?
Yeah.
And you've been to Italy or no?
I've never been to Italy.
And you had said you had not been,
no,
right?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so I'm walking down the street, and what happens, right? People literally just come up to you and like, oh, ciao bella, come stai, blah, 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 whatever, you know. And then they're giving you, they're like, vuoi mangiare qualcosa, blah, blah, blah. And so, like, the next thing I know, they're just trotting out the eggplant, and they're saying,
wow.
Just, seriously, just like he just experienced it. So gentle, so loving.
Awesome.
That sounds like my kind of place, definitely.
Right. Come have some food. Come have some coffee.
Where there's food and
like a little cognac in your coffee.
Good wine and good food. That's all you can ask for.
There you go. It's a different world.
Any other good stories planned or coming up?
Oh gosh, I'm working on a number of really great stories. I've got a 5-part series coming up for Hispanic Heritage Month, which is in September. And so we're going to be profiling some prominent Hispanics in the diocese and the history of Hispanics in the diocese. You know, it sounds a little boring, but actually it's kind of cool because nobody ever talks. It's almost 50% of the population within the diocese is Hispanic, is what I've been finding out. So that's
all right. Sounds good. Well, Maddie, you take good care of her next week.
I will certainly try.
Sure. And just get some platform shoes. You'll be fine.
And you have fun in Massachusetts.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going down the Cape, doing a little vacation, sun and fun. If I can get through the tsunami or whatever it is tomorrow, then we'll be in good shape.
It will be okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's it for this edition of Currents. Now, coming up on Monday, you're never too young to learn the Bible. That and more coming up Monday on Currents.
And remember, you can always watch us online. Just head to netny.net/currents, and there you can see clips of the show, check out the blog, Riding the Wave, and all sorts of fun stuff.
That's right. It's all there online. You can also let us know what you think, or just share a story idea with us. We always welcome those. Send us an email. The address is dropusaline, that's all one word, at netny.net.
That's right. Well, for Matt McClure and Natalia Ortiz, I am Francesca Maxime. Thank you so much for watching, and have a fantastic weekend.